The ground has just erupted beneath British politics, sending shockwaves through the very heart of the Labour Party. In a moment that stunned the nation, Keir Starmer's entire team has resigned. 43 MPs walked out live on television, leaving viewers speechless and the party in ruins. At the centre of this political earthquake lies a jaw-dropping £22 billion scandal, so colossal, so corrupt, that even Starmer's most loyal allies could no longer stand by his side. What has unfolded is more than just a crisis of leadership. It is a total collapse, a betrayal of trust so deep it threatens to rewrite the course of Britain's political future. From closed-door whispers to live, on-air resignations, the unravelling of Labour has been nothing short of historic. The question now burns: how did it come to this, and can the party survive the storm that has shattered its core? The implosion of Labour did not begin with a sudden explosion, but with a slow, creeping rot that spread quietly through its foundations. For months, murmurs had circulated about questionable financial dealings, secret contracts, and backroom arrangements that betrayed the party's public promises of transparency. At first, it was brushed aside as political gossip, the kind of rumour that swirls endlessly around Westminster. But then came the leaks, documents so damning, so detailed, that they exposed a sprawling network of corruption at the very centre of Starmer's leadership. Billions in public and party funds had been diverted through shadowy contracts, funnelled into companies tied to donors, lobbyists and close associates of the Labour elite. What made this scandal unforgivable was not just the staggering amount of money involved, but the betrayal of values Labour once claimed to defend. £22 billion, an unimaginable sum, was siphoned off through contracts that never delivered, projects that never materialised, and services that were little more than illusions. One contract alone saw £3.4 billion vanish into so-called consulting services, yet no trace of work was ever recorded. Another funnelled more than £1 billion into a digital outreach campaign with no evidence of activity. This wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate deception, orchestrated under the watchful eyes of those closest to Starmer. The first cracks appeared quietly. Junior officials, sensing the noose tightening, resigned from their posts, issuing short statements that hinted at ethical concerns and irreconcilable differences. Few paid attention at the time, but what began as a trickle soon became a flood. Shadow ministers, senior advisors, and influential MPs followed, each resignation letter more explosive than the last. They accused the leadership of secrecy, greed, and betrayal, declaring that they could no longer remain complicit in a system that sold out the very people Labour was meant to represent. The public shock grew with every televised walkout, each one a blow to the party's crumbling credibility. The resignation of the Shadow Chancellor was the turning point. Standing in Parliament, his voice trembling with fury, he laid bare the truth. Starmer's leadership was rotten to the core. He accused the Labour leader of orchestrating a cover-up, silencing whistleblowers, and sacrificing integrity for profit. His words struck like lightning, electrifying both the Commons and the country. Within hours, the Shadow Foreign Secretary followed, calling the scandal a betrayal that has destroyed the soul of Labour. By nightfall, the front bench was in ruins, over a dozen senior figures abandoning Starmer's ship in full public view. The scale of the collapse became undeniable when the number of resignations reached 43. The sight of MPs filing out live on television was more than political theatre. It was a spectacle of rebellion, a declaration that Starmer's reign was over. These weren't minor figures seeking attention. They were the very backbone of his leadership, the team that once stood shoulder to shoulder with him in building Labour's credibility. Now they had turned against him, detonating the scandal in front of a national audience. And yet, even as chaos consumed his party, Starmer clung to power. In a desperate press conference, he insisted that the crisis was exaggerated, that the contracts were legitimate, and that resignations were nothing more than political manoeuvring. But the public wasn't convinced. His defensive tone, his refusal to take responsibility, and the comparison is devastating, and it resonates with people who see a system warped by politics rather than guided by fairness. The scandal takes on an international dimension as news outlets abroad begin covering the story. In Canada, Australia, and the United States, commentators express shock at Britain's treatment of Lucy. Headlines describe her as a political prisoner, and human rights groups quietly raise concerns about the precedent being set. Britain, once regarded as a defender of liberty, is now being accused of descending into censorship and authoritarianism. Starmer's government, already struggling to project strength on the global stage, finds itself mocked and questioned in foreign media. Farage, seizing this angle, declares that Britain has become a laughingstock, governed by a leader who jails mothers for words while claiming to uphold democracy. The embarrassment abroad only magnifies the humiliation at home. Inside Westminster, the pressure builds to unbearable levels. Backbench Labour MPs whisper of rebellion, furious that their leader has dragged them into a battle they never asked for. Some quietly approach the press, hinting that they were never comfortable with the severity of Lucy's sentence. Others fear the political consequences of standing by a Prime Minister who appears out of touch with basic human compassion. Opposition parties smell blood, with Conservative and Reform MPs circling like sharks. Each parliamentary session becomes a brutal spectacle, with Starmer fending off jeers, accusations, and calls for Lucy's release. His responses grow shorter, more mechanical, and less convincing. The once confident barrister now appears as a man drowning in a scandal he cannot control. Raymond's decision to step into the public eye has completely shifted the balance of power. His voice is unpolished, untrained, but that is precisely what makes it so powerful. He speaks with the authenticity of a man who has endured loss and refuses to let the state bury his wife's story. Farage amplifies him, but it is Raymond's raw honesty that resonates. Together, they form an unlikely alliance, one a populist firebrand, the other an ordinary husband, yet both united by the belief that Britain has lost its moral compass under Starmer. It is this pairing that terrifies Labour strategists. Farage provides the political firepower, but Raymond provides the unassailable humanity. To attack either is to alienate a public that is already restless and enraged. The sense of suspense grows with every passing day. What will happen next? Will Lucy's sentence stand, or will mounting pressure force the government to relent? Will Starmer cling to the law as written, or will he bend to the will of a nation demanding justice? The answers remain uncertain, but one truth is undeniable. The scandal has spiralled beyond his control. The man who once presented himself as the embodiment of order and fairness now stands accused of presiding over cruelty and censorship. The cracks in his leadership are widening, and what began as one mother's imprisonment threatens to engulf an entire government. Outside Parliament, the anger was volcanic. Constituency Labour branches released open letters demanding Starmer's immediate resignation. Activists who had once championed him as a fresh start for politics now called him a fraud. On social media, membership cards were filmed being torn apart and burned. Labour, a party that for over a century claimed to stand with the working class, was now seen by many as no different from the corrupt elite it once opposed. For countless supporters, the betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about believing in a leader who had promised honesty, only to conceal a web of deceit that spanned billions. Behind the scandal lay something even darker, the shadow slate. Leaked emails revealed this covert advisory board, a secret council of corporate executives, donors and lobbyists, operating in the shadows of Labour's leadership. This group, unelected and unaccountable, shaped policy, allocated contracts, and manipulated strategy for their own benefit. They were the unseen architects behind the £22 billion palace scandal, pulling the strings while Starmer presented a clean, moderate image to the public. Now exposed, the shadow slate represented everything Labour claimed to fight against, yet it had been allowed to flourish at the very heart of the party. The fallout has only just begun. With Starmer's leadership hanging by a thread and Labour's credibility in tatters, the country faces a political crisis of historic proportions. The walkouts, the leaked documents, the betrayal, all of it has shaken the nation. And as the dust settles, one thing is certain. This scandal is not over. What has already been revealed is shocking, but whispers suggest even darker truths lie hidden, waiting to erupt. Britain now holds its breath as the Labour Party teeters on the edge of total collapse, and Starmer's future grows dimmer by the hour. As the scandal deepened, the walls of Labour's headquarters seemed to close in, suffocating a party already drowning in betrayal. The exodus of 43 MPs was not merely symbolic. It was a catastrophic blow to the very infrastructure of Starmer's leadership. With every resignation, the machinery of the opposition ground to a halt. Policy briefings were abandoned, key parliamentary committees left leaderless, and communications teams dissolved into silence. What had once been a tightly controlled political machine now resembled a crumbling fortress, its foundations shattered by the weight of scandal. Britain had witnessed leadership crises before, but never on this scale, never with such speed, and never with the image of a party unravelling in real time before the eyes of the nation. The £22 billion scandal had stripped bare the promises Starmer made when he first rose to power. He had sworn to restore trust, to cleanse the party of factionalism and backroom deals. Yet the documents now flooding the press revealed a reality that was chillingly different. Payments routed through shell companies, advisory contracts signed without oversight, and billions spent on projects that delivered nothing but empty reports and untraceable invoices. Investigative journalists uncovered patterns that were impossible to ignore, a network of insiders enriching themselves while party members and the public were kept in the dark. It was not just a story of financial malpractice, it was a betrayal of the very principles on which Labour was built. The anger within Parliament was electric. MPs who remained loyal to Starmer found themselves increasingly isolated, forced to defend the indefensible as cameras pressed closer and microphones captured every hesitation. In one heated Commons session, a senior backbencher rose to his feet and thundered, "This is not leadership, it is larceny dressed as politics." His words echoed across the chamber, met with cheers from those demanding change and icy silence from those still clinging to Starmer's side. The division was raw, the tension palpable, and the spectacle unlike anything Britain had seen in decades. For the public, the betrayal cut deep. The scandal landed like a punch to the gut for millions who had placed their hopes in Labour's promises of renewal. Households struggling with rising costs and economic uncertainty now learned that billions had been squandered behind closed doors. For many, this was not just corruption, it was cruelty. Anger spilled into the streets, with protest banners raised outside Labour offices across the country. In Birmingham, Manchester and London, furious crowds gathered, chanting for Starmer's resignation. Long-time party members, some with decades of loyalty, declared their trust had been shattered beyond repair. The shadow slate revelations only poured fuel onto the flames. The idea that a secret council of unelected figures could dictate policy and direct billions of pounds enraged even those who had long tolerated political compromise. The leaked emails painted a picture of a parallel government within the party, a shadow structure accountable to no one, yet wielding immense influence. It was here, in the dimly lit corridors of power, that promises of public ownership were diluted, climate pledges weakened, and resources diverted into the pockets of insiders. This was not just corruption, it was systematic manipulation, the bending of democracy itself to serve private interests. Whistleblowers, once silenced, now stepped into the spotlight. Former aides recounted how investigations were halted, files locked away, and dissenters threatened with deselection. Some revealed how MPs who dared to ask questions were sidelined or stripped of influence. Others spoke of deliberate intimidation, of phone calls warning them to stay quiet for the good of the party. These testimonies exposed the machinery of control that had allowed the scandal to fester unchecked, a chilling reminder that corruption thrives not only in money but in fear. Starmer's attempt at damage control only deepened the crisis. His press conference, billed as a moment of reassurance, turned into a spectacle of denial and defensiveness. Instead of accountability, he offered excuses. Instead of clarity, he offered vague reassurances. He pointed fingers at predecessors, at systemic issues, at anything but himself. But the mask had slipped, and the public saw not a strong leader weathering a storm, but a man cornered, desperate, and unravelling before their eyes. His words rang hollow, and his refusal to acknowledge the scale of betrayal only confirmed suspicions that he was complicit in the rot. Meanwhile, Labour's internal structures collapsed into open rebellion. Constituency Labour parties passed motions of no confidence, demanding Starmer step aside. Once loyal unions broke their silence, with Unite and others hinting at severing ties altogether. Even Labour councillors, who had fought local battles under the party's banner, spoke openly of betrayal. The chain of trust that bound the party together had snapped, and in its place emerged chaos, division and despair. What made the moment even more staggering was the speed of Labour's fall. Just weeks earlier, the party had appeared poised to challenge for power, buoyed by polls and a growing sense of public dissatisfaction with the government. Now that momentum had evaporated. Instead of preparing for leadership, Labour was bracing for survival. The scandal had not only stripped away credibility, it had exposed the hollow core of a party that no longer seemed to know what it stood for. And yet, even as Starmer fought to cling to power, his allies melting away by the hour, whispers began to spread of alternative leadership. Angela Rayner's name surfaced repeatedly as a possible caretaker, a figure who might steady the ship long enough for a transition. Others spoke of a coalition of senior MPs preparing to seize control. But these whispers brought no comfort, only more uncertainty. For if £22 billion could disappear under Starmer's watch, what else lay buried beneath the polished surface of Labour's operations? What other secrets might emerge in the days to come? Britain now stood transfixed, watching a once mighty opposition crumble into fragments. The spectacle was both shocking and tragic. A collapse not only of leadership, but of trust, of principles, of the very idea that politics could serve the people. The question hanging over the nation was no longer whether Starmer could survive. He had already lost the confidence of his team, his party, and much of the public. The question now was how far the damage would spread, and whether the Labour Party itself could endure the storm of revelations tearing through its heart. The storm that engulfed Labour showed no signs of slowing. In fact, with every passing day, the scandal widened, drawing in new names, new documents, and new betrayals that painted an even darker picture than before. The resignation of 43 MPs had been a seismic event, but it was only the beginning. Now attention shifted to the inner circle of Starmer's leadership, where whispers of a deeper conspiracy began to emerge. Insiders spoke of a network so entrenched and so coordinated that the £22 billion scandal was just one chapter in a much larger. It became clear that the shadow slate was more than a council of advisors. It was the real power behind Starmer's throne. Leaked memos showed how this group dictated strategy, from watering down nationalisation pledges to reshaping Labour's stance on climate and energy. Their fingerprints were on every major policy shift that had puzzled members for months. Why had Labour softened its stance on public ownership of utilities despite overwhelming support from its base? Why had climate commitments been quietly scaled back, even as the planet edged closer to crisis? The answer was now plain. Policies were not shaped for the people, but for the profit of insiders, donors, and corporate allies. This revelation did not just damage Starmer's credibility, it struck at the very heart of Labour's identity. As these truths spilled into the public domain, the anger of Labour's grassroots erupted with full force. Constituency branches organised emergency meetings, many of them streamed online to thousands of furious members. The debates were raw, emotional, and unforgiving. Veterans of the party spoke of betrayal unlike anything